Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome again to another edition of HealthReform 2.0, the only podcast in the world for people with a curious mind and a desire to have a better healthcare system. I'm your host, Tom Locher, and I'm joined today by my partner in crime, Tim Henning. We're going to take a little bit of a different tack today. We've been doing history for the past couple of episodes, and we wanted to take a break to do something a little more enjoyable, a little more lighthearted, and also to give you a flavor of what, once we get through the history, many of our shows will be like. So without further ado, let's have Tim join us. He just had some oral surgery yesterday when we did the show and came through like a trooper. So Tim, how you doing today?
Hey, Tom, I'm doing good. I actually feel a lot better. I can actually feel my nose and my face, which is a good thing. Yesterday was tough, but we came through. Thanks, everyone, for joining. This little departure this time, and we're going to spice this up now and then with a couple of really interesting stories. This story will be something that you could use in your cocktail parties and coffee table conversations, and I think we'll have a lot of fun with it. But before we start, did you ever hear my story about my experience in Japan and the Viagra situation?
No, I don't think you ever told me that. Give us a little flavor about Japan and Viagra.
Yeah, so it was a number of years ago. It was right after Viagra just came out. I can't remember the time frame. I was involved in a transition of our business from a large very large Japanese firm to another very large Japanese firm. We'll keep the names anonymous. And in that process, I'd gone back and forth and very formalized and whatnot. Then one day I got a call from my contact, Sonodo, and he said that Mr. whatever his name is, and I can't pronounce his name right, so I'm going to call him Mr. Big right now. So Mr. Big, the CEO of this very large, prestigious Japanese company, was coming to Silicon Valley, and he wanted to stop in and have a conversation with us about the transition and whatnot. Okay, no problem. So we set up the whole series of meetings, and they're very formal and was pretty impressive, and it went off very well. And so we were on our way back and actually accompanied them back to SFO. That's the formal thing you do. And we come out of Santa Clara, we're on the 101, and we're driving up, and Sonoda taps me on the shoulder and says, Tim Sung, is that a pharmacy? And I said, yes, it is. He says, oh, Mr. Big would like to have you go in and get him some Viagra. And I went, well, it doesn't quite work that way. And he was very disappointed. But being the creative individual that we sometimes can be, I happened to have a friend at the time that had just gone to work for the drug company. I can't remember the company that introduced Viagra. But I just got thinking real quick. So I called him on the phone. I said, where are you? And he said, I'm in San Francisco. I said, good. Get on the 101 and head to SFO. Meet me in Terminal 3 on Tier 5. Go down to Tier 2. Take the Sky Bridge over. There's a Pete's Coffee right there. I'll meet you there. He said, what do you need? I said, I need your samples. So long story short, we get there. We get there a little bit early. And we meet. And sure enough, he's got his samples of Viagra, and we were able to give that to Mr. Big. And he was the happiest person in the world, a big smile on his face. And once again, Mr. Big could actually be Mr. Big. And so he took off, and about a month and a half later, I'm going back to Japan to work on some additional, transitions. And I get a call from Sonodo, and he said, Tim Sung, you're not staying in the normal hotel you stay in. I go, oh, really? He says, no. You are a invited guest at the company's names company retreat. They're a formal house or whatever you want to call it that they invite dignitaries to and whatnot. So on that particular trip back, I was taken to this beautiful resort. They're kind of a getaway, whatever you want to call it. It was absolutely stunning, and treated to one of the most incredible meals I've ever had. I had two geisha girls sitting on each side of me. I don't know what the heck they were feeding me, but it was, I didn't even have a chance to actually complain, because that would have been the wrong thing to do. But it was fantastic. So from that point forward, I could do no wrong concerning the situation, or the fact that I was held in high esteem by the CEO of this very large corporation. So there you go, folks. Funny what Viagra will do for you.
I guess my question is, when you got Mr. Big the Viagra, you did what a good person would do and explain what he should do if he ended up being Mr. Big for 3 or 4 hours, right?
Actually, my buddy, who actually was the drug, he represented the drug company, actually went through the things you need to do if things don't go good or go too good. So, yes, we were clearly explained to him, but remember, we're going through an interpreter, and fortunately, I'm sure that everything ended up just fine.
Well, one day in the future, we should take some time to tell the audience the actual story about Viagra, because that is, in and of itself, probably one of the best examples of a modern day patent medicine. Anyway, so what is the name of the story that we're going to talk about today? We have a title for it.
Yeah, so I'm not going to give the story away today. I'm going to kind of lead up to it. You're going to lead up to it, actually. And it's one of the most interesting stories in patent medicine. It's here with us today, every day, more than you know. In fact, I'll go over a few minutes from now what will be the very thing that I enjoyed this morning. So with that, no further ado, we're going to title this Lieutenant's Invention. And I'm going to reference your book, The History and Evolution of Healthcare, and I found the stories of the patent medicine area fascinating, as we mentioned before. It was amazing to me how many of these patent medicine companies are still around today, in one form or another. Obviously not doing the same things they were before, but there is still a great deal of hangover relative to these particular companies, a few of them at least. So how about let's starting this series with one of my favorite stories from the book. Okay, so let's just take you back to the mid-1800s. The battle for Columbus was at its peak. What would be the last battle of the war was coming to its end. Unaware of this, the lieutenant was riding headlong into battle on his trusty steed. The lieutenant had not had to go far from his birthplace to get there. He was only about 74 miles from his home, where his parents still lived. So as the lieutenant squared his shoulders to engage with his rapidly approaching foe, he was truly fighting for his homeland. His extra motivation was no doubt necessary, because despite being the nephew of a famous fighter from multiple wars, who was now a lieutenant general of the army, the lieutenant himself did not have fighting in his blood. And unlike his uncle, he was a pharmacist, not a graduate of West Point. So the lieutenant engaged his opponent as he began his fight for his homeland. He soon took a slashing wound to his chest. He fell to the ground, and he was eventually carried away from the battlefield. So he took a pretty good blow to the chest. You and I talked about this yesterday when we talked about ancient history and the battles and the close quarter combat that took place and the horrible, terrific wounds and whatnot. So what happened next to the lieutenant? Well, typically the lieutenant received morphine for his wounds. And like most of the Civil War soldiers, he became addicted. And unlike the movies, this kind of wound was significantly painful. The pain persisted many months after the battles, and the war ended. So what happened next? Well, the lieutenant's addiction deepened, as you can imagine. But unlike most of his training as a pharmacist, it helped him recognize his addiction.
He began to seek a way to break his opioid addiction. Since he was not just a pharmacist, he was also a chemist. The lieutenant began experimenting with a number of new concoctions to affect his cure for his addiction. First, he tried some ingredients extracted from the buttonbush plant, a toxic plant that's native to Alaska. Then other concoctions that included a combination of spices and non-opioid chemicals that had some numbing or pleasing effects. The combination of drugs and spices was very necessary, as the raw taste of most of the chemicals that he was putting in this concoction were very, very unpleasant. Eventually, the lieutenant found a mixture that he could tolerate. It was a combination of an extract of the coca plant from western South America, which was chewed in Bolivia to help manage pain, an extract of the cola nut that was chewed by the people of the rainforest of Africa and included a mild stimulant, caffeine, to help his mind offset the dulling effect from the coca leaf extract, and the aromatic flower of Damiana, a shrub that was native to Texas, South America, and the Caribbean, that was included because it gave a pleasing taste and a nice aroma to cover the smell of the copious amounts of alcohol that were used in this concoction. It helped all the ingredients. The alcohol was necessary to help the ingredients stay in solution, and with the spices and plants, it just really gave a nice, pleasant taste and feeling and became an effective solution. Now, the lieutenant found his new concoction successful, as it helped wean him from his morphine addiction resulting from the war wound. And the inventive pharmacist also began to test it on other veterans like himself. Soon he was testing its curative abilities on many of the other afflictions of the day, like nerve trouble, dyspepsia, mental and physical exhaustion, gastric irritability, wasting disease, constipation, headache, neurasthenia. We talked about that yesterday. You accused me of having it, which is probably true, and impotence, something that Mr. Big might have had.
Well, that's interesting. My goodness, look at all that stuff in there. From what you've just said, I assume this must have been one of the early patent medicines.
Yeah, it really was. It was one of the first truly patent medicines in the United States that has stuck around for a while. In April of 1885, Pemberton's French wine coca hit the market and became an immediate success. In one of his early advertisements, now Dr. John Pemberton said, his medicinal concoction was particularly beneficial for the ladies and all those whose sedentary employment caused nervous prostration, irregularities of the stomach, the bowels, and the kidneys, and those who needed a nerve tonic and a pure, delightful, diffusible stimulant.
So I got a question. This guy was a pharmacist. When did he become a doctor?
Well, he evidently never did become a doctor. Like most patent medicine men, he just started to call himself one in order to better market the product. Lieutenant John Pemberton really did have a hit on his hands, but within a year, Atlanta and Fulton County, Georgia passed temperance laws, which made the sale of this magic elixir illegal. The lieutenant knew if he pulled out the alcohol, the concoction that he had come up with wouldn't stay in solution anymore. It would separate into layers like oil and vinegar. But in solution, he had to keep it in solution so people could drink it. It wouldn't be a pleasant cure-all if it didn't stay in solution. So after some effort to find a non-alcoholic solution that would still keep his chemistry readily drinkable, he turned to another popular chemical being used for other drugs made in that day, carbonic acid, which we today call soda water. And it was a chemical that was readily available at drugstores for mixing with syrup bases of many other medications for easier consumption. These non-alcoholic mixtures were called soft drinks, and those with alcohol became known as hard drinks. We talked about that yesterday.
Yeah, we did, and I clearly remember going to the soda fountains as a young boy. So if this product was so successful, how come most people have never heard of it today?
Well, I would say au contraire, mon ami, as the French say. They have heard of it, but it took a little while longer for it to change to get a new name, the name of a product we all know and love today.
So they did a pivot.
Yeah, exactly. Just like all the startups today, they had to make a little bit of a pivot. Now, Dr. Pemberton needed to come up with a new name for this concoction. He couldn't keep calling it red wine coca. If he kept calling it a wine, people would presume it had alcohol and it would be violating the law, and then he would be shut down, as he was warned he would be after temperance passed in Georgia. So Pemberton's bookkeeper, a guy named Frank Mason Robinson, is not the only one who came up with the new iconic name Coca-Cola. He's also the one that was responsible for the handwritten style of the logo as it appears still today. Yeah, Coca-Cola. That was this drug, this chemical, this patent medicine that Dr. John Pemberton came up with.
This is amazing. So this guy invented Coca-Cola. I bet Warren Buffett thanks him. How come most of us don't know about this guy in the story?
Well, there's a little bit more to the story, as there is with lots of things in history. Little did the lieutenant know when he was squaring his shoulders to confront his approaching enemy that his future invention would become the desired soft drink of troops around the world in many future wars.
Well, you would think that the Civil War Lieutenant John Pemberton, inventor of Coca-Cola, would have died a wealthy man.
Sadly, he didn't. Shortly after the release and immediate success of his cure-all medication, the lieutenant fell ill and was nearly bankrupt. You see, his magical elixir, as some had called it, had not really cured the problem that it was designed for. His addiction to morphine had continued.
So how did Warren Buffett get in this game? How did he own it?
Well, in 1888, a guy named Asa G. Chandler, along with 3 or 4 other investors, bought the rights to Dr. Pemberton's formula for $2,300. It was Chandler's aggressive marketing that actually brought the real success to Coca-Cola, making him and his investors many, many millions of dollars and allowing him to establish his, what was then called the Central Bank and Trust Company.
So what finally happened to the good Lieutenant Dr. Pemberton?
Well, later that fall, in 1888, the Lieutenant Dr. John Stith Pemberton died from stomach cancer at the age of 57 and was returned to the site of his and America's last Civil War battle and was buried in Columbus, Georgia at the Linwood Cemetery. His only son, Charles, who worked for a time for Asa Chandler selling his father's formula, died 6 years later, himself an opioid user.
Fascinating story. So when did Coca-Cola, as we know it today and love, lose the cocaine?
About 1903, 1904, just before the advent of the temperance laws in the U.S., as that started to come in. They were already out of the alcohol game. They knew that there was pressure to start to reduce addiction in America starting in around 1900, and they saw the writing on the wall and decided they really had to get the cocaine out. Now, some people think that they got out cocaine and then they put in caffeine. The caffeine was always a part of the original formula. They didn't put in, they just added some more caffeine to give it a more stimulative effect.
So I told the story to my dentist today before he started doing what he did. And he was fascinated by it because he didn't know it either. But he had a comment to say. He said, well, they should have left in the cocaine and taken out the sugar.
Yeah, but then it would have tasted like crap.
No, there you go. So how much soda did the good doctor sell then? And boy, based on my consumption, how much does Coca-Cola sell today?
Well, when Dr. Pemberton had his first year of sales, had his best year of sales, honestly, he sold a remarkable, for that day and age, 1,049 gallons of syrup in 1888. Now, 5 gallons of syrup made 30 gallons of Coca-Cola. That's about 240 bottles the way we would look at it today. And remember, a lot of that was sold through a drugstore in little cups that people would come in and buy their medications, take it, and then come back a day or two later. So Pemberton sold in his period of time about 42,000 bottles of Coke in 1888. Now, today, Coke sells about 1.8 billion bottles of Coke each and every day. That's 657 billion each year. I'm going to say that again. Coke sells 1.8 billion bottles of Coke each and every day, 657 billion each year, almost 16 million times more than John Pemberton sold in his only year of selling his concoction.
Just wait till that aluminum tariff goes in place.
Exactly. That'll be fun now, won't it?
Absolutely. It's only
Warren
one penny.
Buffett's going to love Trump. Oh, he doesn't like him already.
No, it never has. So were there other patent medicine makers like Coke who are still making soda today?
Yeah, well, there's Dr. Heyer's root beer, which is now just Heyer's root beer. There's Dr. Pepper, which is still called Dr. Pepper. And both of these concoctions were made by pharmacists, one in Texas, one in Philadelphia, who started to get an understanding of what Dr. Pemberton was then doing, and they jumped on the bandwagon. There was Jamaican ginger beer, which we now call ginger ale, another patent medicine that was sold. Lots and lots of these things that kind of existed up to the early 1900s. And frankly, ginger ale was something my mother used to give me as a child. And you may have been given. Often they would stir the ginger ale because it was felt that it would have a soothing effect on your stomach. You could have drunk sugar water and it would have done the same thing. But, in the 50s and 60s, my mother was still giving ginger ale to people that didn't feel well.
No, I think that's still prevalent today as well. I mean, I see that all the time. My grandson's sick right now, and I don't know if my daughter's giving him ginger ale, but there sure is a lot of stuff like Tamiflu that I talked to her about today. I remember when I was sick, my mother taking this thing called Vicks Vapor Rub. I mean, it's probably a legitimate thing. He rubbed this greasy crap all over my chest, right? And I'm like, what is this stuff? And I think they had something in it that opened up your nose. I don't know. You can get the same thing from NyQuil today.
It had menthol in it, and it was Vicks Vapor Rub. And actually, it is yet another patent medicine from the 1870s, I think, was when it was founded. And it was a cure-all. It cured all kinds of things. It was good for stomach problems, kidney problems, and you would rub it on various parts of your body. But, again, when you and I were kids, our mother would rub it on our chest and help open up our nasal passages, and it would help us get over a cold. It never stopped us from getting over the cold. Up until today, you get cold medicines that say if you take this medicine, if you have a cold, your cold will be over with in 10 to 14 days. Well, if you do nothing, your cold is over in 10 to 14 days, or at least it used to be. The data today says that the cold actually is lasting somewhere about 21 days. Why? Well, the cold virus is mutated, and it's learned a few things about how to stay alive longer in our body, but that's another story. But along with Vicks Vapor Rub was a whole number of other kinds of nostrums that were out there.
Yeah, so let's talk about that for a minute. I assume, and I know there was, because there were 28,000 estimated at one point. What were some of the other patent medicine makers? And are these products still around in one form or another? We talked about some of them.
Yeah, well, we talked about Pond's cold cream. There was Carter's little liver pills, which existed all the way up into the 1960s. Another thing I remember as a kid, we had bottles of these Carter's little liver pills around the house. Whorehound drops, which when I was a kid and would go to the pharmacy, we would buy Whorehound drops if you had stomach aches. You can still buy them in some candy stores. I love them. I actually like the way they taste, but they have no medicinal value. Smith Brothers coughs, we talked about them. A number of companies that were around then that are still around today are people like Squibb. And if you look at a Squibb catalog from the 1800s, 1890s, you would find an interesting parallel to what you're seeing today in the last 8 or 9 years with legalization of marijuana. Squibb had about 20 products in its catalog, and about 18 of them were based on cannabis oil, cannabis extract, cannabis this, cannabis that, cannabis for biliousness, cannabis for this, for Katara, cannabis. There was a lot of these things going on in those days, and people now have moved away. We talked about Miles Laboratory and Dr. Miles compound extract of tomato and Nervine and Alka-Seltzer, and we've talked about Listerine. Many of those products are still around today and actually sitting on grocery store shelves where we go buy them.
This is, absolutely true and amazing. So the whole cannabis hemp, thing, we'll have a whole series on, bringing in my most favorite topic, William Randolph Hearst, which I can't wait to tell that story. Maybe I already have, I can't remember. But it should leave us for great conversations going forward. So I think that's kind of where we're at today. Looking forward to our next episode. We're going to be talking about the 1900s and the progressive era. So I hope people tune into that. I hope they enjoyed the last episode. And we're trying to do at least 1-2 of these a week. And I hope people are enjoying them. I'm surely enjoying the topic and having the opportunity to have these conversations and dig more into this whole history lesson, and hopefully leave people with some tidbits that they can share or have a laugh at, or at their next cocktail party when the opportune time happens. And somebody has a Coca-Cola in their hand, you say, where that came from? So anyway, that's my thoughts, Tom. What do you want to? What's your final thoughts for the day?
Well, my final thoughts are that there's so much fun in the history, and we're spending some time, as you and I said yesterday, we're kind of trying to get people through the important pieces of history that have affected why we don't have an effective healthcare system today. And I think it's good to kind of stop a little bit and go back and take a look at some of the things that were going on back then and how they apply today. There's thousands and thousands of stories. There's the story of a doctor in the 1880s that decided that a way to cure incontinence was for him to transplant sheep testicles into a man that needed Viagra today. So maybe Mr. Big in the 1890s would have seen this doctor and had the sheep testicles implanted in place of his. Now, obviously, that was not a good thing to do. It had deadly and dangerous consequences. But those were the kind of things that happened in that era, and to some extent, we still see them happening today. We'll draw parallels to that. But the main thing I think we want to do now is say, look, we're really enjoying getting a chance to talk to you guys and tell you about our stories and how we've gotten to where we are. And we really appreciate you listening to us. As I said, this is an example of the kind of shows we're going to start having as we get out of the day-to-day. Just remember, please go to our website, which is www.HR20.com, HealthReform 2.0. Go there and read some of the articles, and you can listen to the podcast there. But we do really appreciate you listening to what we're doing. We thank you for listening. And remember, hit the like button and subscribe and go to our website. So,
hey, Tom, one more point, if I can. So, one of the things we're trying to do is make history fun. I think that I think one of the criticisms of history, it's boring, it's dry, it's all dates and all that kind of stuff. No, it's actually, there is that. But what we're doing is try to make it fun. So to make it more fun, you talked about the sheep, or what is it, sheep testicles you just talked about?
Exactly.
Remind me to tell you the story where syphilis came from on the next episode. So
that'll be good. Let's do that. Let's talk about these things.
We'll have some fun with it and share some information you may not or may know, and try to make it such that it's a learning experience that also gives you a laugh and chuckle along the way.
Well, I agree. And as usual, Tim, thanks for joining us on the journey. I really like having you in the announcer's chair with me, so to speak. And we thank everybody for listening, and we look forward to you tuning in on our next show. So we'll see you. Bye.
So long.